Hello, my name is John Solomon. I'm with the Cybersecurity Advisors Network, and I am here today with Dan Elliott from Zurich Resilience Services in Canada. He is with the cybersecurity consulting portion of this part of Zurich, a global financial services firm primarily active in insurance and reinsurance. And we're here today to continue CyAN's series of videos with members, stakeholders, partners, and other figures of interest on various topics around cybersecurity. This video is not going to be a very focused chat. It's a conversation that I planned for a while together with Dan to explore aspects of his activities and his background and how they're relevant to CyAN and our members' activities, trends in current cybersecurity capabilities developments, concerns, predictions, and generally kind of an overview from the perspective of one of our members with a lot of experience in both the public and private sectors in the field of cybersecurity, risk management, law enforcement, cybercrime, and various elements in that general ecosystem. So I'd like to hand over to Dan if you'd like to give a quick introduction, who you are, what you've done, where you are, what your activities are, etc.
Sure. Thanks very much, John. So my name is Dan Elliott. I'm with Zurich Resilience Solutions in Canada. I'm the principal for their cyber risk consulting group. And I've been here since fall of last year. Our role here is basically to provide our clients with assessment and uplift to make sure that for our insurance clients that they're at a good risk posture. And then for those who wish to come on board to help increase their maturity and resilience so that they're in a better risk position before they start looking at risk transfer. Prior to September, I spent 6 years with CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service here in Canada, which is Canada's government intelligence service. I was doing everything there from some work in the field and operational work. And then at headquarters, I was working within their risk wing, building the framework and then doing a wide arrangement of risk assessments, risk judgments and reports and appetite management work. Prior to that, I'd spent 15 years in the public service in various law enforcement wings, starting out in border services with cross-border firearms, drugs, exploitation, things like that. And when a lot of those criminal groups and organized groups moved online, so did I. Started doing some online undercover work and supporting Homeland Security and cross-border trafficking and what was at that time the precursors to business email compromise on a personal and corporate scale. And then from there moved into counterterrorism for a few years, working with the RCMP, in their national counterterrorism group in an integrated national security enforcement team. So a whole bunch of acronyms and a whole bunch of work from private to public, but all kind of focused around building individual resilience against these large crime groups.
Thank you for the introduction. Sorry, solutions, not services. I got that wrong initially. Your marketing department is currently knocking on my door, trying to get their revenge. So it's always interesting to have a conversation with somebody who's coming from the public sector, as somebody who has spent all their life in the private sector. Not only that, but also ever in non-military backgrounds, never in law enforcement either. It's really interesting to get a perspective, especially from people like yourself who move into the private sector in areas like risk management, resilience, developments. So my background is very, very heavily focused on risk management as a capability, development of risk management and risk assessment as a capability. And I have this strong philosophy that risk is currently the underlying main driver of information security activities in the corporate world. So I guess the first question to you is, when you work with clients, when we say developing resilience, developing risk posture, Zurich obviously has a cybersecurity insurance arm and offering. To what degree do you see regulation, the desire to get good cyber risk insurance rates, as well as just general good practice? This is something that we should be doing, and maybe at the very outside, it's a commercial benefit for our organization to have a good security posture, to be known to have a good security posture. To what degree do you see these four factors as drivers of a desire to manage risk and to have a good strong, mature risk management posture?
Wow, that's a big question, John. Okay, I think so. So I'll caveat it with that. I've been in the private sector now for 4 months, 5 months. So my bandwidth of experience and knowledge is tethered to that, and the networking and the work I'd done when I was in the public sector, keeping in touch with those in the private. What I've found is that there's a large swing from groups where the IT and IS division, information security groups, are not speaking the same risk language to the traditional risk management and insurance groups. And in those organizations, it's at the ITIS, they're looking at, I need more controls, I need to put more things in place. And the risk management side of that is always looking at, well, what part of the business am I protecting, and what's my loss run if the business shuts down for a number of days, or if I can't continue to perform at full value. In those organizations, there's really cross purposes. And I think in that, cyber insurance becomes really a factor of regulatory requirement or of partnership requirement, where I want to do a deal with this organization, and one of their requirements is that I have cyber insurance. So those organizations we tend to find are earlier on the maturity scale, and it's not just about let's tag on more risk controls. It's about making sure that we understand where risk transfer sits in that hierarchy from an IT and IS perspective. On more mature organizations, I think there are groups that are looking at this as value add, where they're really starting to show that, we understand what our center is, what our crown jewels are, what we're trying to protect. We're speaking organizationally in the same language of, we're trying to mitigate these risks, we're owning these risks, we understand that we're trying to transfer the top line. And in those organizations, they're able to speak both in their public documentation and when they come into us to negotiate their risk and their insurance rates, they're in a much better place. Like I get on calls with, director of IT or CISOs and the CIO and the CFO and their insurer. And you can tell the organizations where everybody's been speaking together and has a common threaded language. So I'd say it's very different from, one end of the maturity spectrum to the other as to what's causing them to come in.
That's a good point. And I mean, there's a diagram I did a couple of while ago. I'll see if I have the video editing wherewithal to blend it in quickly. That shows basically what I see in my experience as the evolution of motivators to do security stuff, whatever that security stuff is. Now we speak about risk management and controls. At some point, it was basically just, this is the stuff that we should be doing. I think it's really interesting that you mentioned, risk transfer and the disconnect between information security and IT groups and the underlying business, the guys that are doing financial risk management, which tend to be very mature, at least in the wake of, the 2007 GFC and the imposed, financial controls and risk management controls as a result of that. So it's been really interesting to see an evolution in that regard, where organizations, I think, are increasingly prepared to bridge that gap, but I think there's still a long way to go. So obviously the holy grail is when an organization can go to its customers and say, hey, security is actually a value add. We're more secure than our competitors, so you should go with us. But I think we're a long way from that. And I think, even though regulation is a very, very good and necessary basis for companies doing the right thing, as the business and the IT guys begin talking to each other, I think the cyber risk insurance aspect is kind of the new frontier at the moment, where it's the big motivator that companies are looking at. This is really good. And I think what I would also like to talk to you about is I'd like to go a little bit into your background, and in your experience, dealing, let's talk about, let's take the drugs and the alcohol and the online abuse and things like that. But in purely in the cybercrime arena, and obviously the actors tend to overlap very heavily. What has been your experience in generally kind of trends, observations in terms of how malicious actors are moving between types of activity that are profitable for them. So, for example, sorry, my phone keeps ringing here. Apologies. Do you see a trend that cybercrime actors are moving away from, things like smuggling in the physical world to more lucrative aspects of things like ransomware networks, et cetera, online? Or what are some general observations about what the crime world has been doing online, what direction that they're going in?
So I think it's still a talk of maturity. So the organizations that we saw that were doing a lot of the I don't want to call them petty crimes, but we'll call them traditional organized crime space, where it's traditional fraud, real life fraud, traditional money laundering, moving guns, moving drugs. Those are a lot of the organizations that are national or small scale multinational criminal organizations. The large scale state sanctioned, state sponsored, or at least driven with the support of a state actor, they've been able to move online a lot faster. So, and I think that's driven by a willingness of certain country actors to allow them to grow and flourish in areas where
certain country actors who shall not be named.
Yeah. So I'll play as careful as I can as working for a Swiss company. So it's it's going to be a challenge always, to both dealing at the simple end of people who are moving guns and drugs and those things, but that's a lot easier to do and requires a lot less technical understanding and know-how than what the online cybercrime has required up until recently. Once we get into the ransomware as a service, malware as a service, we're going to see another shift, I believe, where these actors that are having to deal with multiple law enforcement agencies across borders and serious federal crimes and serious repercussions if they get caught, can very quickly and easily move into the online ransomware space and online extortion space without needing as much technical know-how as they did, a few years ago even.
And I think I want to quickly touch on the concepts of jurisdiction. I think general trends have seen, for example, Chinese actors, Chinese government affiliated actors, PRC actors of being more, and I'm vastly generalizing here, of course, interested in espionage, information theft. North Koreans, Lazarus, for example, being more active in terms of actual state actor attacks on things, and our Russian friends very often being the actual state actors being more active in disinformation, while the state affiliated or state tolerated actors are more the kind of cybercrime actors because their jurisdiction stops. Do you see in the part of the world, whether it's EU, whether it's Five Eyes, where it's generally accepted that this kind of cybercrime is not tolerated? Do you see a growth in willingness to collaborate between law enforcement agencies? And do you see the policy frameworks as evolving to more collaboratively, taking down these kinds of networks, these kinds of actors, regardless of where they sit?
I do. And I mean, the shortest answer is yes. The long way around it is really, it depends on where. I had the good fortune over the past few years to meet with and collaborate with a lot of our EU partners. And I've found that just by the nature of the way they began collaborating in real world, traditional crime, we'll call it, traditional live crime, that moving into the cybercrime space was very fluid. They had the technical capacities across multiple jurisdictions. They already had a notion of collaboration and working together. They were running in, integrated teams and joint operation centers, very smooth. Throughout a lot of the other nations, it's not the same way. It just simply isn't. Five Eyes, very close running actors, and we've always had really great collaboration, whether it's real world or cybercrime. The challenge has been in the law enforcement space. It is much more personality driven, and there's much more many more limitations on jurisdiction. So even national law enforcement agencies have more challenges in pursuing criminals who are engaged in cross-border and international activities than intelligence organizations do. It was a lot easier for us to gather information and intelligence and find out what's going on than for our law enforcement partners to be able to pursue it criminally. It was just the nature of the laws and nature of jurisdiction. So it's less so a fact of desire to do something, and as it is their ability to actually get those crimes prosecuted.
I think what I've seen is a lot of success tends to come when there's cross-pollination between private sector and public sector entities. So not only just talking to each other, but actively the same people who tend to move, for example, between law enforcement, private sector companies, national cybersecurity centers, etc., which tends to foster trust building. A really good example of this was in the Dutch case, the National Cybercrime Unit and the Hansa Bay disruptions, or the collaboration with the TrickBot disruption led by the FBI and Microsoft a few years ago. Do you see tendentially a trend in law enforcement to be more open to having the geeks, basically the known people in the cybersecurity space, joining these high tech teams, or does the law enforcement capability tend to be more organically developed?
I would argue that it's probably the latter. I see it more in my space as more people are moving back and forth from public to private and so on. So they know individuals, and the community is small. So if you know who to reach out to, it makes it a lot easier to build that trust, foster those relationships, and find out ways to make it work. Within national intelligence organizations, we were experts at building relationships and fostering that trust. So it was very smooth. Law enforcement traditionally works in more black and white space. So it was harder for them to move into those collaborations. The US is a different animal altogether. I mean, their bleed back and forth between intelligence and law enforcement, it's a lot grayer than throughout most of the rest of the Western world. So I think building those relationships to gather information, to understand what criminal actors are doing or what state-sponsored actors are doing is very easy. Then it becomes a matter of passing it over to law enforcement and helping them build those same relationships so that they can continue on where intelligence organizations left off.
Okay. Do you have any advice for private sector information security operatives talking to law enforcement, whether it's as victims or as participants in trust groups like the Europol Financial Services Advisory Group, things like that? What kind of caveats are there? What kind of talking points are there to kind of get into these trust groups? How do you, for example, there's a couple of conferences that are very heavily focused on bringing law enforcement and private sector together. What are some ways for private sector firms that are either affected by cybercrime, well, we all are, I guess, or want to get into these collaborative mechanisms to get more actively involved with law enforcement partners and to build that trust?
So within a lot of the national spaces, there are now national cybercrime centers that are headed by people who, in my experience at least, I've dealt with ones through all the Five Eyes, very knowledgeable, eager to collaborate, and very intelligent individuals. It doesn't take a whole lot for them to sit down for a meeting, quite frankly. And I'd say a discussion is where it starts, because the more CISOs and ITIS leaders who want to speak to these groups, the easier it is in times of crisis to actually get the message out, get assistance, get fact spread, find out who an actor is. My favorite analogy has always been that, Noah started building the ark before it was raining, not after. And a lot of people reach out to law enforcement and cybercrime centers after something bad has already happened, and then they want to quickly filter their way in and build a relationship while their house is on fire.
I mean, that's
It's not the
a
time.
great, truism for information security budget in general.
Yeah.
It's that you tend to have a lot more budget and credibility and flexibility after, it's hit the fan than beforehand. So it's speaking from personal experience. I can only second that.
Yeah, it's so true. And that's always been a challenge. And whether in my law enforcement time, my intelligence time, or now in the private sector, I think relationship building is one of those things that's free. Spend the time building out relationships with people who are like-minded and across the industry in the private sector, but also understanding people in law enforcement intelligence in the public sector, so that when you need somebody to assist you in going to bat, either to build out, better controls, better defenses, or when something bad happens, you have people you can call who you've had a pre-existing relationship with. And most of these national cyber centers are looking to build those private relationships, both so they can keep a better pulse on what's going on in large-scale industry, whether it's fintech, critical infrastructure, large-scale multinational shipping. They want to know what those organizations are doing and what threats they're facing. So I just say, reaching out for a phone call is the easiest way to do it. And anybody in the senior security space probably has somebody that they can put you in touch with.
Okay. And I think circling back to the private sector side of things, there's a reason why we do this stuff. It's not just because risk management is good. Well, it is, but there is a definite need to protect the organization from the baddies, essentially, whether they're state actor or other. How do you think an information security department can best communicate the urgency of needing to prepare to their management, not only in terms of building these risk quantification or compliance with good practices or regulatory requirements, frameworks, but just in terms of messaging to the business side of things? Look, we're not trying to spread FUD here or panic. There is a very real danger that you're going to be hit by BEC, by ransomware. There's been plenty of organizations that have been completely taken down. Sony Pictures back in 2014. And a lot of organizations seem to think, well, it can't happen to us until it does. So what kind of words are we using here? What kind of vocabulary are we using as somebody in the private sector, but from a law enforcement background with experience in this area?
So I'll put it this way. When I came into the private sector, especially in the insurance space, I thought I had a good understanding of the depth and breadth of attacks that were happening to organizations. It's deeper, it's more expensive, it's happening more widely than I thought it was, and I was in the intelligence and law enforcement space. So I don't think it is acceptable anymore for boards or executives to consider it won't happen to me. I think that the conversation in a lot of cases has shifted from it won't happen to me to I'm fine, I've spent X number of dollars. So I think instead what has to happen from ITIS is to shift the conversation from what we're spending on these controls or on these tools or tactics to shifting to, okay, this is what happens if this goes down for X number of days. And the business side will know what their churn is on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. And the general understanding and statistics are there for how long an organization in your vertical is going to go down for. So if you look at that and consider, well, these are my vulnerabilities, and this is the likelihood of us going down, and this is how long it would take to go back up. So this is the millions of dollars that we'll spend and lose in that space. And because we're missing these basic controls and we're not protecting our crown jewels, it's also going to be more expensive for us to get insurance and transfer that risk. And if you kind of flip that conversation into those business terms, you haven't talked about any of the actual risk controls or tools at all. You haven't mentioned anything technical that's going to be difficult for a non-technical board member or a C-suite member to understand. but you've made it pretty plainly as to what they're losing in a financial sense. And that allows you to lead back to, okay, so this is now what we should be putting in place. And this is our timeline for building that out to make us more resilient, so that if we do get hit, when we do get hit, we can get back up faster, which means less cost, less of business interruption, which is also increases our likelihood of getting insurance, or decreases the premium we're likely going to pay. So from a business sense, you're able to describe those consequences, choose option A, choose option B. I don't think that's changed at all from the way we explain stuff to our kids, to the way we talk to business leaders, to the way we talk to members of the general public. You give them their options and describe the consequences of each option, and then you build back to the solutions. A lot of what I get in organizations when I have conversations is they start talking to me about, well, I've got these 12 or 13 controls in place and all these tools are there, long before I have a talk with them and go, okay, so what are you trying to protect? Like, what's the thing that you're worried about? Is it, an IoT device on the floor that you're worried about? Is it, PII? Is it, medical data? What exactly are you concerned about? Somebody stealing, breaching, shutting down? What are you worried about? And then let's build out to the controls.
Why? Where? So what? Well, what is the fundamental? Do you understand the fundamental business rationale for what you are doing? Right? You're not protecting a device. You're protecting an enabler for the guy that's actually making the money to pay your salary.
Yep. Yeah. And I think the biggest one, and the one thorn in my side is MFA. Multi-factor has been one of those things that we still have to discuss with business leaders as to why it's there and what it does. And I think the problem is the discussion for controls like that has been about a technical control and the cost for that, rather than, well, this is what it's protecting. Your access point becoming used and abused by a threat actor to gain access to everything you have access to and beyond. Here's a roadblock we can put in front of them. And if we build back from their conversation toward the technical piece, I think it'd be a lot easier, and it would give them some stake in it. I love using analogies to describe things, and love using language that people already speak before you start layering in technical controls and ideas that they don't understand because they don't work in that world.
I think that language point is an important one to latch onto. I have this very uncompromising philosophy personally that, business leaders in information security or information technology is like an owner of a car. Now, you're not expected to take apart and reassemble an internal combustion engine, but you really should know that, when the check engine light goes on, you go to the mechanic and you change your oil every now and then, maybe know how to change a tire. And that's something that, while to be fair, a lot of information security people should do a better job at speaking business, quote unquote. And the CISO function on the whole has been evolving more and more towards a business function from a technical function. I think it's also fair to expect on the business side a certain level of understanding of the realities of the people that are trying to protect them. If you have bodyguards, you need to know what the limitations of those bodyguards are, more or less. The same thing goes for security groups. And I think what you're talking to, these speaking each other's language, is a bidirectional thing and can only help both parts of the organization, speak more closely with each other. The same way that, your CEO should understand, for example, what their sales crew or their industrial design and production organization is capable of or is not capable of, so they understand that part of their business, at least at a high level. Yeah. I really appreciate your points on this, and it's extremely interesting to see your perspective from the law enforcement cybercrime side and the business, the risk management, information security side that you've been working your way into intensely the last couple of months. And it's going to be really interesting to continue seeing how you bring that experience from your background chasing the baddies online to helping organizations now chase the baddies or prevent the baddies from doing things that cause them having to be chased, I guess. Eloquently stated.
It's all part of the same, that same string, right? I've looked at it as jumping into a different part of that, a different link in the chain, a different part of that string that I was always worried about. At intelligence, you're looking very early on in that spectrum. Law enforcement, you're very late in that spectrum. I really see where I am now in that middle ground. So I don't have access to all the knowledge and space that I did when I was working in intelligence, but I have a lot more impact than I did there with individual organizations and with industries as a whole. I'm not doing the enforcement side that I was in the law enforcement, but I'm hopefully able to get the victims back up on their feet a lot faster, or build them better so that they can get back up on their feet a lot faster. So it's nice being in the middle ground. It's I haven't found it to be that substantially different, other than learning a new role to play.
And I think it speaks to a topic that's one for a separate conversation, which we'll do in the future, which is also the evolution of the public-private cooperative space, where both the public sector, whether it's law enforcement, military, policymakers, national cybersecurity centers, and private sector actors, understand that they're fundamentally part of the same ecosystem that is protecting the orderly functioning of society, even though each of us, for example, in the private sector, may only have a very small role to play in that. But that's a really good point. Also that you mentioned about resilience, the recovery ability. How it's not only about preparing for, identifying, responding to, but also basically ensuring that no matter how bad the impact is, that you're able to come back from that, bounce back from that more effectively, without affecting your ability to do any to continue doing your job, essentially. So I just want to kind of open it up. If you have any parting comments for the session, anything that you'd like to share with the group that's particular of interest that you're working on right now, that you think.
Yeah, I mean, really appreciate you getting me on, John. It's I look forward to future conversations. There's a lot of space that it covers. I think that the piece that we talked about near the end is really, it's been my bread and butter, and it's what I've latched onto since coming out, and it's really helping the ITIS group and the traditional business leaders bridge that translation space. And I think if we worked harder at that piece than at layering controls, or at worrying about fund loss and financial losses, we could kind of uplift all. So yeah, that's really my biggest focus, is getting people to stretch out a little bit more, to speak the language on the other side, because the organizations that are doing that are winning. they're much further ahead. So it's worth it in the end. And that's what I've been trying to help people do, and happy to keep doing.
Or at the very least, they're not losing, which is a good thing.
They're not losing as much. Yeah.
So listen, thanks very much, Dan. I appreciate you taking the time. To anybody watching this, please do have a visit to our website. That is cybersecurityadvisors.network. We also have a link from CyAN.network. You can also find us on LinkedIn. And please do check out our YouTube channel. The rest of our videos here, we'll be adding a lot of new content in the coming months. If you have any topics of interest, please don't hesitate to contact us. There's also a series of podcasts that's currently in development that will soon be on Spotify and Apple iTunes. And we hope to see you in our various events and our various webinars. And if you have any interest in CyAN as an organization and what we do, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And hope to talk to you soon and see you on the next one. Thanks very much, Dan. Take care.
Thank you. Cheers.